Hi folks, and we are back again with yet another episode of the Fintech Alchemist. I am Karan, and today we are going to talk about customer discovery in a nutshell, and we are then going to segue gradually into secondary research and market research, right? So, yeah, let's begin in a few seconds. So, hopefully, you watched the part one of the series, the build series that this is, and the part one talked about how not to build a startup. We went to a blog of Steve Blank, and we saw the old method, the product development method that a lot of companies follow and used to follow earlier and what were the problems in it and why it did not really work that well, right? And then we moved on and we talked about something called as the customer development model, in which we saw the four steps in the previous video. In case you didn't check it out, you can feel free to like check out the earlier episode of this video. uh, it might help you make more sense of things. But yeah, video moreover is an independent episode, so you mostly shouldn't need to do it, but I'll still link in the previous video in the comments in case you feel like. All right. Now, going forward, we're going to talk about a part of customer development model, which is the customer discovery, right? And we're going to see how it links in with the concept of a lean startup, and which is suggested by Eric Ries, which is one of the best ways to build up a startup uh, according to the common consensus, right? So we're going to talk about that, and then I'll try to recap about customer discovery in a nutshell in one video. So it's a quite a challenging task to do that, but I'm still going to attempt to do it. So because discovery is a methodology that goes on for say weeks, or even if not weeks, it goes on for months. So it's very tough to summarize everything, and that's not going to my agenda as well. It's going to be an overview of it, and hopefully we'll see more of customer discovery along say potential future videos on this channel. So hope for that. But today should give you a good gist of the process, and we'll go into details which are relevant right now. Okay, resource. So the first website that we're looking at is this blog by Mohara, and we're talking about how the build, measure, learn cycle, which is a cycle that we're going to talk about, how this methodology can help you build digital products successfully, right? And this is one of the parts of which is also talked about in Lean Startup book by Eric Ries. Okay, so first we talk about that why this cycle, the build, measure, and learn cycle, is a process for creating digital products, right? Successful digital products. So what you do is that you have three particular steps if you read in the name itself, right? You're building, you're measuring, and you're learning. So you build by how do you build, right? First thing you need to know is you need to discover what your users need. Then you need to identify the problems and then test them, right? That's where the learning comes in. So building and measuring is obvious, but testing them actually brings them in a learning cycle, right? And as the word says, it's a cycle, which you're going to see in the latest parts of this blog, right? So all credit to Mohara for providing this information. So now we'll cover the following content in this blog. You can probably see it on your screen now. So first we'll talk about why the lean startup methodology is a thing. And I believe we covered most of it in the previous video for episode 1. Essentially, rather than having a build as you go approach, so like you build a product and just assume that customers will come for it, that's a uh, very, let's say, engineer centric approach, where we like to build approach without with we like to build products without thinking much about it. But that doesn't really test very well in the market, as experience has suggested. So we know of common stats like so many startups failing, 9 out of 10, sometimes people say 3 out of 4 new businesses fail, right? So that's what we're talking about right now. So this lean startup movement, it began somewhere in the early 2000s, and at the helm of it, these are a few books that can be attributed to the beginning of it. So we saw a blog post by Steve Blank, and this is the same Steve Blank here. So there's this book called as Four Steps to Epiphany, and then you also have the very famous book, The Lean Startup by Eric Ries, right? So this lean startup method was developed for software development and launching digital products. Okay, so this blog also briefs through the key principles of lean startup. Uh, I'll send in a link. I'll add the link to this blog in the description. I'll kind of try to breeze through it to maintain the brevity of the content. Okay. So first we talk about that you don't need to be at a particular place. You can start up from anywhere. Entrepreneurs are everywhere. Then rather than planning or forecasting, which works for conventional businesses, uh, startups should more do experiments and then adapt from the learnings from those experiments. That's what the book talks about. Then you have a concept of innovation accounting, which is basically a way of finding out if a product is satisfying the customer's needs, right? And then we talk about validating learning, where startups are supposed to fail fast and learn fast, right? And then now we're coming to the helm of the topic, which is the build, measure, learn cycle. So this is supposedly a cycle where you build a product, you try to measure the reaction of the customers, right? And now you take this reaction, process it, understand it, and go through it again to learn something from it, take out insights, and then you decide then you repeat it, right? And then you decide whether you're going to iterate on it, pivot, or restart. What does that mean? So, for example, if we did a particular build, measure, learn cycle, right? So, at the end of the results, what are takeaways from, say, our learn phase were that, oh, this sounds good and we are on the right track, right? If everything looks good, then we're going to iterate on it. We're going to go check the next tick box on our list, right? If it is not so much, but suppose say we go to a learning phase, we talk to a customer and we realized, okay, so you know what, the customers aren't really looking for an alternative, for example, for say Swiggy, but they are actually looking for an alternative for a healthy food option for food delivery, right? So you might find out an avenue, I would like to say it like that, an avenue that has some potential. So that's worth pivoting over, right? So the outcome of one build, measure, learn cycle can either be iterate or pivot. Now we're going to talk about restart. Restart is a stage where you realize that, okay, the hypotheses or the assumptions that you started the process with, right, that were invalidated and the user really doesn't care about what you were trying to build. So it might be disheartening, but it seems that it's a good way to fail early and get to know what you're doing wrong at an early stage so that you can fix it, try to find out what that customer actually wants, and try to solve it if it makes sense for you. Right. So essentially, that's basically what the build, measure, learn cycle talks about. So you technically start at, let's say, a pseudo learn stage where you get some data, and this is exactly where secondary research comes in, which I'll talk about in a later stage in this video. Right. You start, you learn about, say, the market, or what is the ecosystem around your potential idea, and then you generate the ideas, then you build on it, then you maybe have an MVP or a minimum viable product. You test it with the customers, measure it, you get more data, and you keep doing it along the way, right? So this is essentially what the model is trying to tell us, that this is the correct way to look at startups or build a startup. Okay, so now we talk about, I already told you about an MVP. Now we talk about what can an MVP look like, right? So an MVP can be anything, physical prototype, or just a basic, barely functional app, or just a proof of concept. I know of startups of some cases that although they were technological businesses, the first customer that they got wasn't really with an app as well. It was the founder himself went to the customer to acquire him or her, and then that's how they made the sale. So even though it was, the crux of the idea was based on an app, their first acquisition or their first customer didn't really need an app either. It was just the proof of a concept, right? Similarly for Dropbox, which the blog mentions, that their first MVP was actually a video, right? A YouTube video on how people can use their product, right? And that got tons and thousands of subscribers. And that's how Dropbox took the BML cycle, and they gradually added some features like integrating with Microsoft Office. So the focus is not a fully functional product. It is rather that we continuously make incremental processes, right? We kind of follow this agile like cycle and keep doing it in an iteration and iteration and iteration. Okay. So now that's the build phase. Right now we're talking about the build phase, right? Now we move on to the measure phase. So this phase essentially involves running experiments, conducting surveys, and analyzing metrics, etc. Right? But the devil is in the details, guys. So you need to understand that to evaluate a system, you need to first select metrics on which you will test them, right? So selecting those metrics is also a work of art, right? So how do you select a metric? You have to ensure that they are actionable and provide insight into how your product is performing. So what do you mean by actionable insights? It should not be like, okay, let's say if we are doing a survey of users on OTT platforms and we say, okay, the Netflix content isn't good, right? If that is your insight, it is not actionable. It needs to be more actionable in forms of like, okay, there is not enough regional content on Netflix, right? So that could be something actionable where you can go forward and in a further iteration of build measure loop, you make a pinpointed assumption. You think, okay, what's the next step to find out more details about this assumption? You will make it something like, okay, how many users want regional OTT content on platforms like Netflix, right? That is where a hypothesis or a concept of an assumption comes in. And you see how I gradually iterated on this assumption to make it actionable and something that gives me data from all this cycle. Otherwise, if we keep it vague and say, okay, people are not happy with the Netflix content, then that really doesn't get me anywhere if I want to become a challenger for Netflix. Hope that makes sense, right? So we talked about the metrics that matter the most, right? Then we talk about how do we collect the data. So there are multiple processes that lean startups follow for collecting the data, and we'll probably dive into these at a later stage in another video. Okay. So again, remember the goal being that you need to collect actionable information so that you can take future decisions and that affects the future iteration of your product, right? So you need to keep it specific and don't collect unnecessary data and just keep piling up with it, right? So that is not going to be that useful. So now we have finished the first two cycles, which is build, where we built a minimum viable product on the basis of an assumption, right? That also started with an idea that I thought should be good, but I kept it the least with the least resources possible, right? And did a trial run with it. Okay. Now there's the entry to the build measure loop cycle. You'll say that it seems like a chicken and egg. Where do I start, right? You're telling me not to over engineer products, but you also say that, okay, you're starting at the build stage. Technically, we're not starting at the build stage, we're starting at the data stage, which I mentioned, which we do by something called as the secondary research. And I'll follow up on it later, right? So now, for now, let's go along with the flow and first understand what this cycle means, and then we'll see how do we enter this cycle properly. Okay, so we've covered the build and the measure aspects. Now we're going to talk about learn, right? So the learn thing involves analyzing your data, kind of obvious, right? So here you will try to identify patterns and trends, and this is very crucial because when you run this build measure loop with multiple customers, with multiple iterations, right? You're going to start seeing patterns. That is what is said to be believed, right? So you're going to start seeing patterns across your customers, and this will give you a very good idea as to what customer segment you should target, right? As for an initial launch, or who are going to be your star customers that really bring on the traction to your platform, right? So this is the most crucial, and I feel that it's the most ignored step of this whole process. So that's very important, and we should take a note of that. Now coming to drawing insight, right? Sometimes, as I mentioned, you might draw an insight that okay, my whole idea or my whole assumption that people want more new content on Netflix is wrong, right? But then you might draw another insight from the interviews that okay, it was not that Netflix needed newer content, it was they needed more regional content, right? So we talked about that. So you'll just go back to the drawing board again. You'll try to formulate a new hypothesis or an assumption, right? And build again. So then we talk about the importance of a data presentation. That at the end of a learn phase, it is very crucial that you share these findings and insights and you document it well. Now, why are we saying that? First, if you are building with a team, so you are going through all this effort to find out what's happening with your products, and you're getting so many insights about the problem that you're building, right? So you naturally want your team also to be engaged and aligned in the same way. So that's why it's very crucial that you have these kind of presentations at the end of a learn cycle. And the second, it also looks good for potential investors in a meaningful way. So it will look like you went through the due diligence and you built the product correctly. Okay. So now we're going to move on to an example of how the build, measure, learn cycle works, right? So here's a practical example. So now if we're talking about another meal delivery service, right, which is specializing in healthy and organic meals. So a conventional model, right, something like the product development model we saw in the previous video. A founder would have the idea, they write it down, and then they create a mock website on paper. They bring coders to code the app and they launch the app. They host it on servers and then they get chefs so that they can create the recipes. And then they have some delivery partners to organize logistics and everything. Once the product is complete, the next step is that you step into the market and try to find customers. The problem with this, as we saw in the previous video, is that it requires large upfront investments, and the the crux here is that this might not work. You enter the market and you realize, no, people are not buying my product, right? People are not logging onto the service. Then what will you do? You are down with so much money, capital wasted, and then resource wasted, time wasted, right? There's a lot of opportunity cost. How a build, measures, learn cycle can help you is what we're going to see. In the build phase, we design an MVP. It's just a mere landing page to showcase our service, right? In the measure phase, we are just asking, this is the first cycle, by the way, right? We're just asking customers for feedback on what features they liked or what they did not like. And then we also did a competitor analysis to find out if we are pricing our product right. So this is the measure phase, right? We are doing two things in the measure. In the learn phase, we analyze the customer feedback and market analysis, and then we find out that customers want a customizable meal plan, right? They want it to be more granular, they want more control over it, right? At the same time, they also want flexible pricing options. So that was the end of our first build, measure, learn cycle. Now we go back to the drawing board again and we try to now inculcate the feedback that we got into our product, right? So now the natural next step is that we redesign their website. Instead of offering set packages, now we have added customizability to the customers. We've also given a new pricing tier because that seemed to be demanded on the basis of the competitor analysis and on the basis of customer interviews. Next, we create a prototype and then we test it with a small group of customers. Okay. So next, the measure part of it. Now we again go back to the customers on the prototype and we get data. We are also monitoring this data. Okay. So we are analyzing data on order volume, customer satisfaction. So this is based on the metrics that are important for a business like this. For your business, these metrics might be different. And as we saw earlier, we are supposed to find out those metrics. At what metrics are the most meaningful for me, right? Now we conduct something called as A/B testing and we try to optimize the UX. So after the end of this cycle as well, we learn that customers are liking this customizable meal options, right? Pricing tier is also better. But they realize that, okay, now the more work that needs to be done is on the delivery times, right? In the third cycle, now they work on improving that, right? So you should realize that we saw the three cycles right now. What the startup or entrepreneurs are trying to do over here is eventually move towards something called as the product market fit. And this is why we're trying to find out a market. That's why it's called customer discovery. Who will buy your products? Who is going to be your star customer, right? Who is going to launch you into the market? And who is more likely to continue with you on the startup journey. So it's very important that founders stay grounded and very in the process of this whole methodology, right? So we'll resume in a minute, but yeah, I'll make it fun for you guys as well. So we'll go and look at one meme. That's my best idea to make it fun, honestly. So here's a pitch deck versus promises versus reality meme. And here's something that you would probably relate to if you're a developer. Okay, so back to business. So yeah, resuming where we were, uh, the benefits of using a build, measure, learn approach. So why do that? So yeah, I think it's pretty obvious with my first video as well. One is you have reduced risk. You invested lesser time, invested lesser resources, and you build an MVP quickly. And you got it's kind of like a very fast way of understanding what works and what doesn't. So yeah, as the second point says, it's faster time to market. You're not perfecting the product. It's very cost effective. You're barely invested in the process, right? And then it's very flexible. You can quickly, it gives you room to pivot. It gives you, okay, scratch that. You know, you're not building um more content for Netflix. We are going to build a regional OTT instead, right? That's what this helps you do. So now there are some key takeaways that about the build, measure, learn cycle and how it create helps you create a chance, a product for customers that they will buy. And that is finished. We are done with our first resource. So just to recap, we talked about this BML cycle and why it's important for us. Now the question remains that I told you that you will wait and I told you that I should answer this question at a later stage. Where do I enter this? This is a loop. How do I enter a loop? Right? And that is where the the massive thing called as secondary research comes in, right? So before that, I would like to share something with you guys, right? So the place where I learned all of this, or where did I get to know about customer discovery in general? So I was part of a cohort at IIT Madras. It's their they have this uh, they have this place called as GDC, which is the Gopal Deshpande Center for Entrepreneurship, and they run this particular program called as Incubate, which is meant for transforming research ideas into startups, right? So if you're interested in knowing more and you have a potential idea in a particular team, you would like to take this idea from lab where you're thinking about it and you want to go to the market. So this is exactly the kind of program for that. And if you're interested in it, I highly encourage you to take this on. And it's a great program, and I had a great time learning with the mentors here. So yeah, next we're going to talk about market research, right? So this is also part of the lean startup methodology, and this is going to be quite of a great blog actually. So yeah, let me talk about this first and give credit to whoever wrote this blog post. So this is a blog by TOist, and it's on lean market research for startups. And I honestly found out this resource to be very pinpointed and very helpful. So shout out to them for that. So I'm going to use this as a reference point for reading further on this. Okay. So first we are going to talk about why a market research, right? So before we dive into the blog, we saw the build, measure, learn cycle, and I told you how do you get in. So you start at the learn stage, and you can't just go and hit and trial through things, right? You need to have an assumption that makes sense. You need to make an educated guess on what is your potential problem that your startup is solving. So you make an educated guess by doing a market research. It kind of is obvious, right? So that's your first step. So now we'll go through what the blog is trying to say, right? So you start with an assumption, right? So you start that, okay, there's this particular problem, and in our solution, in a potential solution, we will have a particular pain point that we're trying to address. So we don't think solution centric first. We think from the problem of the user. So first, at this starting stage, right, the problem is that you don't know the market, users, competitors, anything. So to know more about it, you need to do something called as market research. Right. Now, market research can help you help your product teams to find out user needs. You can achieve business goals with it, and you can also find out what decisions you need to make. Right. So now we're going to talk about lean market research and types of market research. Okay, so lean market research is essentially similar to our build, measure, learn model. We are trying to make it iterative, and we are gathering as much data as possible as quickly, right? So it's a great model to start with. Now, talking about research, right? There are two types of research that you can do. One is called primary research and the secondary research. By primary research, it means that you go yourself and try to gather the data. It can be via interviews that you do. It can be via collecting data from various sources, right? As a practice, it is usually recommended to avoid forms and surveys because there's an inherent bias by the user, and you can't really trust the data that you get from such aggregated platforms. Like you're not even sure if the user put in enough effort, and they're being very honest about it. So these are data forms that can be corrupted very easily. So try not to base your hypotheses on the base of that. Okay. So when you get your data yourself via customers, that's primary research. And this is helpful for creating personas, something you can look up. I'll not be covering that at this stage of time. Or about how your market is segmented, right? Understanding what actually disambiguates your market. Market is a very big chunk, if you could say. So you need to find out the segments of your market and tailor your ideas. So that's how primary research helps you. Then secondary research, on the other hand, uses data from other resources. So they could be past studies that have been done on this particular space of the idea you're working on. Then they could be public databases, proprietary data, other data from companies. There are a lot of venture capitals, and people keep on publishing reports on various stages of the economy, right? Your investors are usually bullish on different aspects of economy, and you'll find a lot of research and reports. You just need to know how to search well, right? So that's what we try to do and leverage with secondary research. The question is, why do this, right? One answer is we already have one, because we don't know anything about this idea, the competitors, anything at all, right? That's kind of obvious. Second is, you need to understand that what is the demand for your solution. If you're thinking, if you have some concept of a solution that, okay, maybe I could build XYZ. So you need to understand if it is if there's enough demand. Second, you also kind of need enough documents to attract investors. It should appear like you did the due diligence and you know what you're getting into, right? Okay. So we have multiple goals when we are doing market research, right? One could be, I'm finding out the right person who will buy my products. I'm finding out how much demand is there for my product, or I'm trying to understand existing solutions, what all exists in the market. And even though we might not find what we're looking for, but we end up getting some kind of data. So for example, you might find out that this particular segment, so let's talk about, say, 17 to 20-year old uh, students or teenagers. They are a good target segment for Spotify because they have great network effects going on. In college, they keep sharing music, they have collaborative playlists, right? So you might find out as an insight that, okay, this target audience actually uses this feature more, right? This is some actionable data that you can build upon, right? So you'll find something like that. Then market research, you can also use it for product development, and it creates the base for everything else. Like how will you brand, the tone of your communications, what seems to work with your customers more, right? Every brand has a kind of ethos if you see in startups, right? And such conversations with the customers, or such research calls that you do, that you'll go and try to find out everything about the space, you might find out content or insights that might help you with branding, communication, pricing in the future if you incorporate, right? So next, we need to see market research as continuous, similar to the build measure loop that we talked about. And now, first, the steps, right? We're going to talk about what what ways can we follow the market research. The How do we start with this market research? Again, it seems like we are still talking in the vague language, right? So similar to the build measure learn that we talked about, first the step is that we find out our research objectives. So now we are looking at it at a very scientific way of thinking. So just bear with me. I understand that this content might be a little boring, or a bit too intensive, but feel free to watch this video in parts, pause it, try to watch it at another time, if whatever style works for you. But yeah, try to stay with me. Okay. So first, we're going to talk about research objectives, just like you would do any scientific experiment, right? So we talk about that founders that fail to define and measure their key objectives struggle to gain traction. So when you don't even know what you're looking for and how do you evaluate yourself, are you doing good or are you doing bad? Then there is really nothing that can help you in case you want to build for a longer period of time, right? So when you conduct market research, it should not be very vague, right? It should not be, okay, I want to understand the focus of the study is to get to know the user better or find out opportunities in the market. That's a very vague way of putting it, where you can't see if you got the data you were looking for or you just got a lot of fluff. So it's a very common thing that in interviews you find out that the customer gets emotional and they keep talking about something that is not relevant to your, whatever you wanted to find out. So you might end up in a 1 hour interview and then you go back later and find out, okay, I didn't really get anything meaningful. So we want to avoid situations like that. For that, we need to have a clear set mind as to what we are looking for from this interview well in advance, right? So it is always better to start with a hypothesis, right? So this is again what we talk about. A hypothesis, an assumption that we think, okay, I assume that this segment has this particular demand. It needs to be a bit pinpointed, as pinpointed as you can make it. It cannot be vague. It should not be vague, right? And a good hypothesis won't be that. Okay, so market research will detail about other solutions also, pricing methods, that's something we talked about. And even these should be shaped with the hypotheses. You should not do it vaguely, right? You should build hypotheses and then make them. So these will be the North Star throughout your research. And you will, the whole process of this whole build measure cycle that you're doing, you will do it with that in mind, that you're either invalidating or validating a hypothesis, right? So that is going to be the star of this whole cycle, that to find out, okay, do uh, teens above 19 to say 25, right, do people in this particular segment really want regional OTT content, right? That's a thing that you can have a pinpointed hypothesis about. Okay, so we're talking about the first step of how do we determine a good research objective, right? Now we also have another example hypothesis of white collar employees in big cities. This is about a door-to-door grocery delivery, that we are talking about the segment first of all, that who is the pinpointed person here. It's white collar employees, right, working day jobs in big cities. And what is the problem? The pain is they are having trouble grocery shopping because they have come back from their work and their commute is long, they don't have time or energy after the work. So that's a good hypothesis to test. And eventually moving forward, you want to make it all the more pinpointed so that you can get some metrics and you want to test some quantifiable data as well. So as a start, how do you start the research on this? You can check that how many employees are working in which areas and decide which city would have more opportunity for your product to grow. It is an obvious first step, right? So you started with some consumption of data. Maybe you read some news sources that, okay, so and so people uh, are facing this issue nowadays. Then you go on and you thought, okay, maybe we need something like door-to-door grocery delivery, right? That that is also a bit solution centric in my opinion, but it's a start, right? Then you find out this from your secondary research, and then you take it up as a hypothesis moving. So yeah, I'll not go into much more details, but essentially you should answer, your market research should help you answer a few questions that you set in tone. So are there enough people with this pain, right? Are they willing to pay for it? That you might want to check at a later stage once you know about the system itself or the space that you're working in. Earlier few interviews might just be on understanding the space in parallel with your market research that you do. So they can be something like an ecosystem interview. What is the way they are solving the problem right now? Right? These are some really good questions to know from your market research interviews. Then we can turn these questions into measurable ones. As I said, we can talk about markets later. The concept of TAM, SAM, and SOM. For this video, I'll skip it. You can feel free to look it up on other resources. Okay, So the first step was determining our objectives. What do we want to know from this research? The second is, what is the scope of this research, right? Knowledge is something that can keep on going on. There is no end limit to it. So for startups, it's a good idea to set up a limit and understand, okay, we will try to have answers to these so and so questions by this time frame. For example, 2 weeks, so that it makes sense for you. And in any case, even if you don't know enough in 2 weeks, this whole process is iterative, remember. So you can always go ahead and do it in parallel with the other activities. Okay. So you should also know what type of research that you need. There are multiple types of research also, and you need to know certain questions like what answers are you looking for? What is the metrics that will help you in the decision? So after the build, measure, loop cycle ends, right, at the learn stage, you need to know how do I measure? Do I need to go forward, iterate on the product, or do I need to pivot, or do I need to restart? There needs to be a hypothesis that you are either validating or invalidating, right? So you need to know those metrics. That's very important. Okay. So then you know when to stop, which answers are you looking for as a priority, and then how will you reach them? How will you frame these questions? How will you ask them in an interview? So as I mentioned, customer discovery is a very long process. So hopefully we'll find a lot about this in practicality along the future of this channel. But for now, you need to try to relate to this problem if you have been through customer interviews at an earlier stage, right? So you need to make sure that how will you even get the data you're trying to find? Okay, first you know that this is what I'm looking for. The second is how do you find it? What questions are you going to ask? A good practice is not to ask very leading questions or asking questions like should, what do you think? Should you do this? Should we do this? Right? These are very leading questions which might bias the customer. So we avoid doing that and we try to focus on the workflow or the job that the customer is trying to do by the you know what is think by the first principles. Try to find out what is the job to be done for the customer, and we try to document them so that we can use this in the future. Okay. um, Scope doesn't mean that you stop it, you keep on going forward. Now we're going to talk about the third step, which is defining market search methods, right? So we need to make sure that we are using the correct method of research, right? There can be multiple ways. One is interview, there's something called as focus groups, user research, competitive analysis, buyer persona, etc. Blah blah blah. Okay, but choosing the correct research and the right questions at the right time isn't that simple. So need efforts, and that's why we are doing this over iterations so that we gain more context and we get better at this. Okay, so now we talk about how we should focus at qualitative and quantitative data for a lean startup. Uh, Natural conversations actually give the most valuable data. That's something people believe because the subject is people, their beliefs, and their feelings. A number can get you only so far, right? Here you are connecting directly to the empathy of the users. So, yeah, you need data for planning the scope of your product and position in the market. Your go-to methods also should have these in mind. Okay, so now we have some other methods of research which we might take a quick look into. Until then, you can enjoy a meme with Dwight, a very famous character. Okay, so now we're going to only talk about market research interviews, which I feel that is the only relevant section at this particular point of time. So market research interviews, they are qualitative methods essentially, and they are used in the market search phase, where you are wondering what is my market, right? That's also a question which we ignored so far. We're talking about market research, but how do you define the market, right? That's another topic that you can dive deeper into. Then they can be in multiple forms. One is a short interview with random people, or in-depth interviews with target users who represent a user persona. So, like I was saying, that maybe if I was building Spotify, my targeted persona was teenagers or college students. Then I could do an in-depth interview with them, or just talk to some music label company just to understand the ecosystem, right? So we also talk about semi-structured interviews, how they are good, semi-structured in depth. What do you mean by semi-structured? It means that you're not prepared. It's not like a questionnaire that you come up with a set of questions and you start asking the customer, because one, that closes a lot of doors, right? And it also opens up the concept of an echo chamber where you're just getting to know what you thought you is relevant, right? And you that actually also destroys the natural flow of a customer. It is not very comforting to a customer or a user that you are just bombarding them with questions. It's not a great strategy. So keep it semi structured where you know this is what I'm trying to get to know, but the way you try to execute the interview is very organic. You try to do it with conversations, you avoid leading conversations, leading questions. You try to find out what the workflow of what the life of the customer is. You empathize with them, right? So that's the idea on how to do a semi-structured interview, right? And as I mentioned, it leaves an open door for new directions. That's how you can get, oh, a eureka moment where you realize, okay, I didn't even think of this in my hypothesis, but here's a thing that 10 people are talking about this in the interviews, right? Now, another great idea is snowball sampling, which is basically that when you go into a particular niche, right, niche of the target user or a persona, you ask them for someone that matches that persona at the end of the interview. What that helps you do is they refer you to someone, so it becomes a snowball effect. It really helps you, prevents you from your echo chamber, right? And it also makes your task easier of finding and sourcing people. Okay, so then we talk about how face-to-face interviews are a great thing because although you could do it in other methods, it's recommended because you can look at non-verbal cues and you can find out what the customer actually wants to say. Some things they might not, spell it out directly. So that's where you read between the lines. Okay, so kudos. We are mostly done with this particular blog. So you can feel free to go through the rest of the types of research as well. I won't be covering that in the video. And yeah, so credits to Radha for this. It was a great and very compressed form of information for talking about secondary research. So yeah, feel free to support her page. Yeah. Now, moving forward, yet again, I know that we breezed through the last 20 minutes as well. So we have another meme. I hope that you're not asleep uh, by now and you're with me. So I'm sure you'll get to sleep after this, after we're done. We're almost just wrapping up. Moving forward to market types. This is also something that Discovery was covering. So try to understand what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to give you a nutshell of what I learned in the most compressed manner across the months that I was in that cohort. Right. So doing this in a 1 hour video is very tough. But these are some of the main crucial concepts that I feel like are takeaways from that cohort. So I thought I'll bring them up and you can probably read the lean startup and find out more about it. Right. If you do, hit me up, tell me what you learned. It would be great. Maybe I learned something new as well. Okay, so we talk about four market types on and why are they relevant. So depending on what kind of market you belong to as a startup. Here we're not talking about, oh, you are into agri, you are into fintech, right? Here we're talking about the type of a market. So there are four main types of a market according to Steve Blank's framework. One is an existing market, one is a resegmented market, the other is a new market and a clone market, right? Essentially, existing market is obvious. You know the users, you know the market. They are very well known. So they they have a compounded annual growth rate. You'll often see the word CAGR for that, right? Say, for example, e-commerce is a very established market in India right now. So you have a CAGR for this. So it's very tough because you have incumbents in this market. Resegment means that you are identifying a large enough group which is underserved under a current existing market, right? You understand that, okay, these set of users, this segment of users are not being that catered that well, right? New market is a new market. There's a new technology and it might take years for market adoption to happen, right? Then we have a clone market. We take a business model that works outside and you fit it into regional economies, and that's great because you can see that working in a particular other place, right? So you have good amount of content or resources to see their journey and build upon what they did in the past. It's kind of like a hacky way, but at the same time, cultural differences is a big thing. Companies like Ford worked great in US, they never worked in India, right? So that's also a catch there. Don't think that it's a recipe that you can just quickly clone another startup idea. Okay, so here's a quick table which we're going to just briefly follow, and you can refer to this resource offline as well. So in an existing market, we know our customers. In a new market, they are unknown. In a clone also, they are possibly unknown. So what are the user needs in an existing market? uh, it's basically performance. If you have existing solutions, it has to be better in performance, either or costs or integration, right? Similar for resegmented market, but you are a niche here, right? And then we also talk about competition. In a resegmented market, there's a lot of competition. If you're wrong that this particular segment is underserved, right? uh, and then in the new market, what the user needs is transformational. It needs to be disruptive, right? And in competition, you don't have any competition. So why are we talking about all of this? All these things are important factors to consider when you are thinking of launching a startup, because this affects whatever you want to do with it. You want to either how much you spend on say customer acquisition costs, or what is going to be your launching strategy, or how you're going to position a product, how much capital should you spend at it, right? And yeah, so basically having information about this also helps you from falling into these pitfalls of risks that you have, and you can build your product efficiently and understand the space you're getting into. There are some examples that are mentioned. You can feel free to pause the video and take a look. I'll link this blog anyways. So this blog was uh, written by this website. At least it's quoted on this website by Moonwith, and I'm not sure who's the author of this blog, but full credit to them. Okay, so the last step that we have, uh, or the last learning that I want to share from the cohort, is the value proposition canvas, right? And I'm sure a lot of you would be already aware of this, the VPC, and we also have a business model canvas. So let's think big picture now. We are thinking of build, measure, learn cycles. So first we talked about build, measure, learn, why it's important. Then we talked, okay, how do we enter it? For that we need market research, and we kind of need to do it iteratively in a build, measure, learn cycle itself. Now we need to get somewhere with all of this, right? We are doing these BML cycles, we're learning a lot, we're iterating, but now we need an organized way to do that, right? So the value proposition canvas is one of the, let's say, formats that we try to use. So it has two parts, where the left part is a value map and the right part is a customer segment. So through these interviews, what you're trying to do is you're trying to find out people who will be willing to buy your product, who the to whom the product would be relevant. So these are the three parts that they have. You can feel free to refer resources on this. This website itself is a great resource. So essentially, we have some customer jobs, right? So this is where our hypothesis comes in. Customer jobs is essentially what I feel our hypothesis is trying to do. So we need to have a good understanding, and we get this from our customer interviews, right? You'll find out that okay, this is what their workflow is. This is what they're trying to do in the back end. Remove all the services that they're using right now, just get to know what is the in a first principle way what they are trying to do, right? So that's number one. First, second is the pains in the process, right? You'll notice that okay, your assumption is they have so and so problem. The third is what can be better, right? This problem can be made into a gain, and these gains can be of any sort. It can be something like social status also. So you need to document all this. And then on the left side you have a value proposition canvas, which tells you how are you providing value to the customer. Your pains must correlate with pain relievers. How are you going to do that? Like if there's a pain, how are you relieving that pain? If there's a gain, how you're relieving that gain, right? And how are your products and services that you're going to plan to offer in this particular MVP, version 1 or version 2, version 1.2, whatever. How are they referring to these customer jobs? right? So this is a very good organized format where you can set this all in picture, and you can uh, the product of a few build, measure, learn cycles can be understanding of this, right? You can map it out all in one chart, and this further relates with something called as the business model canvas, right? I recommend watching this video. It's a great video to understand this. Okay, so here we're going to refer to a LinkedIn post by Raghuveer Bhatt. He's talking about the relationship between the BMC and the VPC. So we have 9 parts of the BMC. You can see that over here, pretty well documented. So we have customer segments, value propositions, relationships, etc. So this is exactly what a business model canvas looks like. Customer segments is the niche of your customers that you're targeting. Then value proposition we already saw in the value proposition canvas. We have channels. How are we going to deliver them to the customers? We have relationships. What is the interactions that we need to do with them? Revenue streams. How will we generate this income? What are the resources that we are using? We probably need something like, say, cloud providers, or we need a data store. So what do we need? Or if you are a food delivery startup, you need chefs, right? Key resources. Then key activities, that what do you need to do to ensure your success? Maybe it's like, okay, uh, get this particular person onboarded on the platform, or get these many users. Excuse me. Then we talk about partnerships. That probably adds up more for getting this particular person on the platform. And the cost structure. Essentially, it's a document that gives you the gist of your business, of what you're thinking, in one page, right? And this is something that you might want to present to an investor if you want to look if you're looking for investments. So the crux is, startups, what we're trying to do is we're chasing product market fit. And it is said that once we have a good mapping from our customer profile in the VPC to our value map, if there's a very good one-to-one mapping, we have moved towards product market fit. And you'll also start realizing that in your customer interviews. So as it said that the correlation, they are not mutually exclusive. The value proposition is a part of your business model also. And when your value proposition changes, your different aspects might change. Your revenue streams might change, right? Or your channels might change. At the same time, just think it out with me. You are following these build, measure, learn cycles. You're learning every time, you're learning something new about the customer. So this value proposition is changing. Sometimes you might find out, okay, after 3 cycles, you find out, oh, this is not the right segment for me. I need to resegment. I need to focus on another segment. Then, on the basis of that, your revenue can change, your cost structure can change, your partners can change, activities can change, everything can change, right? So these need to be very built in synchrony, the BMC and the VPC, and you need to keep doing that. Once you have a basic, after 2 3 say cycles of getting information of customers, defining the problem well, you need to start actively maintaining value proposition canvases and business model canvases at the end of each cycle, right? And that's how you will generate your insights. Okay, so yeah, pretty long video, and I think we're done with the content I wanted to cover. The crux being, we started from talking about the build, measure, learn cycle, and then we said, how do we enter the stage? We talked about secondary research. What are the types of secondary research? How can we do it? Right? Um, what all do we need to know, and what all insights can we get out of it? And the third, we talk about different types of markets briefly, why that can be relevant to us. Then the fourth is making a value proposition canvas, and next linking it with our business model canvas, which gives you, in the end, a very good idea of what you're going to sell, for how much you're going to sell, to whom you're going to sell, and how you're going to do it. Right. Next step comes developing something called as a go-to-market strategy, which follows very directly after your business model canvas. But once you've gone through the step of going through multiple interviews, going through multiple customers, and this whole cycle again and again, you should have a very good idea of what space you want to do and what exactly is your plan going forward. And that is the stage where you might consider going ahead and scaling it, and maybe getting some investors in, or bootstrapping it, whatever you like. But that is the gist of finding how you can get your first customer, or how can you do it, or how can you find out what is a problem and what is worth solving for a startup. And I think this is a very crucial step to finding your pot of gold, which I mentioned in the intro video. So yeah, pretty long video. uh, I'll just summarize it now, and that's also done. So thank you folks for joining in, and I tried to record it in one take, so kudos to me as well. So hopefully if you like this content, you can subscribe, and just let me know what works for you, what doesn't work so well. And yeah, the next video that I'm going to do, episode 3, is already in works, and I'm going to take up one particular problem. The sector that I like very much right now is ONDC. I'm trying to learn more about it, and I felt that there's not enough content there. And India Stack is something that I'm very excited about in general. So that's what I'm going to do. The next video is going to be me doing research in action, and it's going to be a deep dive video. It's also going to be one of the longer videos where I am as clueless as you are. I'm literally just recording myself, and I'm just working my way through it. I'm figuring things out on the go, right? So it's more, you might look at it from a point of a stream, except that I'm not doing it live. But we can consider that a venue as well if that's the content you folks appreciate. All right. So that's where I sign off. Thank you for joining in. Please share this video if you feel that it's relevant. Uh, Hit me a follow. And yeah, just show some appreciation. It might just make my day. So thank you. Thank you, everyone. All right. You've been great, and we covered a lot in this session. Uh, I'm honestly exhausted. But yeah, kudos. Kudos to us.